She warned him that getting close might steal his breath. But what terrified him more was discovering she was right, and he never wanted to breathe without her again. The gallery was packed with people pretending to understand art. At least, that's what he thought as he stood there, camera bag hanging from his shoulder, wondering why he'd let his sister talk him into coming. The walls were covered with colorful paintings that looked like someone had thrown paint at a canvas and called it genius. Most people were just here for the free wine anyway. He was a photographer. 28 years old, and honestly, he'd lost his spark somewhere along the way. These days, he spent most of his time taking pictures of office buildings and shopping malls for real estate companies. It paid the bills, sure, but it wasn't what he'd dreamed about when he first picked up a camera at 16. His sister had practically dragged him out of his apartment that evening. She'd said he needed to get out more, meet new people, remember what it felt like to be inspired. He'd rolled his eyes but agreed, mostly to stop her nagging. Now he was here, surrounded by strangers in fancy clothes, feeling more alone than he did in his empty apartment. He stopped in front of a large painting near the back of the gallery. This one was different from the others. It was all blues and whites with streaks of silver running through it like wind or water or maybe breath itself. The title card read simply, Breath. Something about it made him pause, made him actually look instead of just glance. You've been staring at that one for 5 minutes. The voice came from beside him. He turned and felt his heart do something weird in his chest. There was a woman standing closer than strangers usually stand, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and unexpected. She had dark eyes that seemed to see right through him, and she was smiling like she knew a secret. I was just, he started, but the words got stuck somewhere between his brain and his mouth. You were just actually looking at it, she said, still smiling. Most people here have been taking selfies in front of my paintings without spending more than 10 seconds looking at them. But you're different. Your paintings, he asked, feeling stupid the moment the words left his mouth. Of course, this was her, the artist. The whole gallery was hers tonight. She nodded, extending her hand. I'm the one responsible for all this chaos. He shook her hand, noticing how warm it was, how confident her grip felt. They're really good, he managed to say. Especially this one. It feels like, I don't know, like trying to catch your breath after running, or maybe like finally breathing after holding it for too long. Her smile changed then. Got softer, more real. That's exactly what it is, she said quietly. Most people just say it's pretty or interesting or whatever polite thing they think I want to hear. But you actually felt it. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. He felt something shift in the air between them, something electric and a little scary. You're a photographer, she said, nodding at his camera bag. It wasn't a question. How did you know? The way you look at things. Like you're framing shots in your head. I do the same thing, just with paint instead of pixels. She tilted her head, studying him. What do you photograph? Buildings, he said, then felt embarrassed by how boring that sounded. Mostly architecture for commercial work. It's not very exciting. But it's not what you want to photograph, she said. Again, not a question. He laughed, surprised by how easily she'd read him. No, it's not. So why do you do it? Because it's safe. Because it pays. Because buildings don't move or change or disappoint you. The honesty in his own words surprised him. He didn't usually open up like this, especially not to strangers. She looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes seeing things he usually kept hidden. That sounds like a terrible way to live, she said, but her voice was kind, not judgmental. Safe but suffocating. Before he could respond, someone called her name from across the gallery. She glanced over, then back at him. I have to go do the whole thank you for coming thing. But don't leave yet, okay? He nodded, not trusting his voice. She started to walk away, then turned back. Stepped closer again, close enough that he could feel the heat of her presence. Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch. If I come any closer, you might forget how to breathe, she teased, eyes never leaving his. Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of people calling her name and wanting her attention. He stood there, his heart pounding in his chest, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He should leave. That's what the logical part of his brain was saying. This woman was clearly trouble, the kind of person who could turn his carefully ordered life upside down. He'd worked hard to build his walls to keep himself safe from feeling too much. 2 years ago, his ex had left without warning, and the pain had nearly destroyed him. He'd sworn he'd never let anyone get that close again, but instead of leaving, he found himself waiting. He wandered through the gallery, actually looking at her paintings this time. Each one seemed to tell a story about freedom and constraint, about the space between inhaling and exhaling, about what it meant to truly live instead of just exist. An hour passed. People started leaving, their wine glasses empty, their social obligations fulfilled. He was about to give up and go home when she appeared beside him again. "You stayed," she said, sounding pleased. "You told me to." "Most people don't do what I tell them," she said with a laugh. "I like that about you. You're genuine." They talked as the gallery emptied around them. She told him about her art, how she'd spent years trying to be what everyone else wanted her to be before finally deciding to create from her truth. She'd been expected to become a lawyer like her parents, to live a respectable, predictable life. But something inside her had been dying, suffocating under the weight of other people's dreams. "So I quit," she said simply, "walked away from everything that was supposed to make me successful and started painting. Best decision I ever made, even though it terrified me." He found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone, about how his photography used to make him feel alive, how he'd capture moments of raw human emotion and feel like he was documenting something real and true, about how his breakup had made him retreat into himself, choosing the safe path over the passionate one. "You're hiding," she said softly. "Behind your camera, behind your safe buildings, behind your fear of getting hurt again." "Maybe," he admitted. "But at least I'm not getting destroyed." "You're not getting destroyed," she agreed. "But you're not really living either, are you?" The words hit him harder than he expected. She was right. He'd been so focused on not feeling pain that he'd stopped feeling much of anything at all. He existed, went through the motions, but he wasn't really alive. The gallery owner came by, keys jangling, ready to close up for the night. They found themselves out on the street, the autumn air cool against their skin. The city lights glowed around them, and for the first time in years he felt awake. "I have to go," she said, but she didn't move. "But I want to see you again." "If you're brave enough." "I don't know if I am," he said honestly. She smiled, that same knowing smile from earlier. "That's okay. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we're scared." She pulled out her phone. "Give me your number. No pressure. If you want to talk, text me. If you don't, that's okay too." He gave her his number, his hand shaking slightly as he typed it into her phone. She sent him a quick text so he'd have hers too. "Good night," she said, starting to walk away. Then she paused, looked back over her shoulder. "For what it's worth, I think you're braver than you think. You stayed tonight when you wanted to run. That counts for something." He watched her disappear around the corner, then stood there on the empty street for a long time, his heart still racing, his mind spinning with possibilities and fears. His phone buzzed with her message, just a simple, "Thanks for actually seeing my art tonight." He looked up at the stars barely visible through the city lights, took a deep breath, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt something crack open inside his chest, something that felt dangerous and exciting and absolutely terrifying. He didn't know if he'd text her back, didn't know if he was ready to risk feeling again. But as he walked home through the cool autumn night, he realized something had changed. She'd awakened something in him that he'd thought was dead, and maybe, just maybe, that was worth the risk. 3 days passed before he texted her. 3 days of staring at his phone, typing messages and deleting them, convincing himself it was a bad idea, then picking up the phone again. His sister noticed his distraction and kept asking what was wrong, but he couldn't explain it. How do you tell someone that you met a person who made you feel alive and terrified at the same time? Finally, on Wednesday evening, he sent a simple message. "Hey, it's the guy from the gallery. Want to grab coffee sometime?" Her response came within minutes. "Took you long enough. Tomorrow, there's a cafe by the river. 3 p.m.? The next day, he showed up 15 minutes early, which gave him plenty of time to question every decision that had led him to this moment. The cafe was small and cozy, with big windows overlooking the water. He ordered a coffee he didn't really want and sat at a table where he could see the door. She arrived exactly on time, wearing paint-stained jeans and a simple black shirt. Somehow she made it look elegant. When she smiled at him, his nervousness doubled and disappeared at the same time. "You actually came," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You sound surprised." "I am, a little. You seemed like you might run away that night at the gallery." She ordered tea from the waiter, then turned her full attention back to him. "So what made you text me?" He'd prepared an answer for this, something casual and safe. But looking at her now, with the afternoon light catching in her dark hair, he found himself telling the truth instead. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About hiding. About not really living." She leaned forward, interested. And I realized you were right. I've been playing it safe for so long that I forgot what it feels like to take a risk." "Is that what I am?" she asked, a slight smile playing at her lips. "A risk?" "Yeah," he admitted. "A pretty big one." They talked for hours. The coffee shop started to empty as afternoon turned to evening, but neither of them noticed. She told him more about her journey to becoming an artist, how her parents had practically disowned her when she quit law school, how she'd lived in a tiny studio apartment, eating instant noodles and wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. "But then I sold my first painting," she said, her eyes lighting up with the memory. "It wasn't for much money, but it wasn't about that. Someone looked at something I created from my soul and wanted to own it, to live with it. That feeling, I can't even describe it." He understood more than she knew. "That's how I used to feel about photography," he said quietly, "before I gave it up for the safe option." "You didn't give it up," she corrected him. "You just put it on hold. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Of course. On hold means you can pick it back up whenever you're ready." She paused, studying him with those intense eyes. "The question is, are you ready?" He didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe he did, but he wasn't brave enough to say it out loud yet. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a pattern. Coffee dates turned into long walks along the river. She'd point out colors in the sunset that he'd never noticed before, and he'd show her how to frame a shot with her hands, teaching her to see the world the way a photographer does. One Saturday, she invited him to her studio. It was in an old warehouse district, up 3 flights of creaky stairs. The space was chaos and beauty combined. Canvases everywhere, paint tubes scattered across tables, the smell of turpentine mixing with incense. "This is where the magic happens," she said, spreading her arms wide. "Or where I make a mess and call it art. Depends on the day." He walked around slowly, taking it all in. There were finished paintings leaning against walls, half-completed works on easels, sketches pinned to every available surface. Each piece seemed to capture something essential about being human, about the struggle between who we are and who we're expected to be. "These are incredible," he said, stopping in front of a large canvas covered in shades of gray and sudden bursts of gold. "What's this one called?" "Breaking Through," she said, coming to stand beside him. "It's about those moments when you finally stop suffocating and remember how to breathe. When you break free from whatever's been holding you back." He looked at her instead of the painting. "Is that what you did? Broke free?" "I'm trying to," she said softly. "Every day I'm trying to." There was something in her voice, a vulnerability he hadn't heard before. It made him want to know everything about her, to understand what made her create art about breathing and freedom and breaking through invisible walls. "Can I photograph you?" The words came out before he'd thought them through. "I mean, while you work? I think it would be amazing to capture you in your element." She looked surprised, then pleased. "Really? You want to photograph me painting?" "If that's okay." "It's more than okay," she said, already moving toward one of her easels. "Just promise me you won't make me pose or anything." I wanted to be real, so he photographed her, and for the first time in 2 years he felt that old excitement come rushing back. Through his lens, he watched her lose herself in her work, saw the concentration on her face, the way her whole body moved with each brushstroke. He captured her hands covered in paint, the furrow between her eyebrows when she was thinking, the small smile when something came out right. It was like remembering how to speak a language he'd forgotten. Each click of the shutter felt like coming home. They spent the whole afternoon like that, her painting and him photographing, existing in the same space but lost in their separate creative worlds. When the light started to fade, she finally stepped back from her canvas, stretching her arms above her head. "Can I see?" she asked. He showed her the photos on his camera's display screen. She scrolled through them slowly, her expression unreadable. When she looked up at him, there were tears in her eyes. "These are beautiful," she whispered. "You made me look, I don't know, like I matter. Like what I'm doing matters." "It does matter," he said firmly. "Your art matters. You matter." They stood there in the fading light of her studio, something shifting between them, something deeper than attraction, more profound than chemistry. It felt like recognition, like two people who'd been searching for something finally finding it in each other. But he was scared. God, he was so scared, because the last time he'd felt something this strong, it had ended with him broken and alone, swearing he'd never let anyone close enough to hurt him again. She seemed to sense his fear. "Hey," she said gently, touching his arm. "We don't have to rush this. We can take it slow. What if I mess it up?" he asked, hating how vulnerable he sounded. "What if I'm not ready? What if we just see what happens?" she interrupted. "No pressure, no expectations. We're just two people who enjoy each other's company. That's all it has to be right now." He nodded, grateful for her understanding, but also a little frustrated with himself. Why couldn't he just let himself feel without overthinking everything? As if reading his mind, she smiled. "You think too much," she said. "Sometimes you just have to trust the moment." Over the following weeks, he found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. She had this way of making him feel safe enough to be honest, to share the parts of himself he usually kept hidden. He told her about his ex, about how she'd left him for someone else, how he'd felt like a fool for not seeing it coming. "That's not your fault," she said firmly. "You loved honestly. There's no shame in that." "It felt like shame," he admitted. "It felt like I was an idiot for believing in something that wasn't real." "But it was real," she insisted. "Maybe it didn't last, maybe she made terrible choices, but what you felt was real. Don't let her bad decisions make you doubt your capacity to love." Her words settled something inside him, eased a hurt he'd been carrying for too long. But then she told him something that changed everything. They were sitting in her studio again, him reviewing the photos he'd taken, her cleaning brushes in the sink. The silence between them was comfortable, easy. "I need to tell you something," she said suddenly, her voice careful. He looked up, his heart sinking at her tone. "Okay, I've been offered a residency. In Barcelona. For 6 months," she wouldn't meet his eyes. "It's a huge opportunity. The kind of thing that could really launch my career internationally." "That's amazing," he said automatically, even as his chest tightened. "When?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks? They'd barely started whatever this was, and now she was leaving. Of course she was leaving. Why had he let himself hope for anything different? "You should go," he said, trying to sound supportive even though inside he felt like he was falling. She finally looked at him, searching his face for something. "Just like that? You think I should go? It's your career. It's an incredible opportunity. Of course you should go." Something flickered across her face, disappointment maybe, or hurt. "Right," she said quietly. "Of course." The air in the studio suddenly felt heavy, thick with things neither of them was saying. He wanted to ask her to stay, to choose him over Barcelona, but what right did he have? They'd known each other for barely a month. And besides, hadn't he learned not to ask people to stay? His ex had chosen to leave, and nothing he'd said or done had changed her mind. "I should go," he said, standing up abruptly. "It's getting late." She nodded, not trying to stop him. As he packed up his camera, he could feel her watching him, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her. If he did, he might say something he'd regret. The next 2 weeks were torture. They still saw each other, but something had changed. There was a distance now, an invisible wall that neither of them seemed able to break through. Every conversation felt heavy with things they weren't saying. Every goodbye felt more final than it should. He threw himself into work, accepting every boring architectural job that came his way. If he stayed busy enough, maybe he wouldn't have to think about her leaving. Maybe he wouldn't have to feel the growing ache in his chest every time he remembered that she'd be gone soon. But at night, alone in his apartment, he'd scroll through the photos he'd taken of her in her studio, the way the light had caught her face, the concentration in her eyes, the pure joy when she'd created something that satisfied her. He'd never shown anyone these photos. They felt too personal, too intimate, like pieces of his heart captured in pixels. His sister finally cornered him one evening, showing up at his apartment with takeout food and a determined expression. "Okay, what's going on?" she demanded, unpacking containers on his kitchen counter. "You've been walking around like someone died. And don't tell me it's nothing because I know you better than that." He tried to brush it off, but she wasn't having it. Eventually, the whole story came spilling out. The gallery, the connection, the growing feelings, and now Barcelona. "So let me get this straight," his sister said, stabbing her fork into her noodles. "You met someone who makes you feel alive for the first time in years, and instead of fighting for it, You're just letting her go? It's not that simple. It actually is that simple. You're scared, I get it. What happened with your ex was terrible and it hurt you badly, but you can't let one person's mistake stop you from ever taking a risk again. She's leaving in a week, he said flatly. What am I supposed to do? Ask her to give up an incredible opportunity for something that's barely even started? Maybe, or maybe you could figure out a way to make it work. Long distance is a thing, you know. People do it all the time. And what if it doesn't work? What if I open myself up completely, and she decides I'm not worth the trouble? His sister put down her fork and looked at him seriously. What if it does work? What if you're throwing away something amazing because you're too afraid to try? Her words haunted him over the next few days. He kept thinking about what she'd said, kept weighing the risk against the potential reward. But every time he thought about calling her, about having the real conversation they needed to have, fear stopped him cold. Then she texted him. Want to take a weekend trip with me? I need to scout some locations for photographs before I go. Could use the company, and honestly, I'd like to spend time with you before everything changes. He stared at the message for a long time before responding. This felt like a test or maybe a last chance. Either way, he couldn't say no. They drove to the coast early Saturday morning. The autumn air was crisp and cool, and the road stretched out before them like a promise. She'd rented a small car, and she let him drive while she played music and pointed out interesting cloud formations. For a few hours, it felt like nothing was wrong, like they were just two people enjoying each other's company, with no complicated feelings or impossible decisions hanging over them. The coastal town was small and charming, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a postcard. They checked into a simple hotel with a view of the ocean, and then spent the afternoon exploring. She took him to tide pools where tiny crabs scuttled between rocks, to an old lighthouse that had been abandoned for decades, to a pier where fishermen sat with their lines in the water, patient and peaceful. He photographed everything, but especially her. The way the wind caught her hair, how she laughed when cold water splashed her feet, the thoughtful expression on her face when she studied the patterns in weathered wood. Through his camera, he was able to show her what he couldn't say out loud. How beautiful she was. How much these moments meant to him. She sketched too, pulling out a small notebook and capturing quick impressions of the landscapes around them. Sometimes they'd work in comfortable silence, each lost in their own creative process. Other times they'd talk about nothing important. Random thoughts and observations that somehow felt significant, just because they were sharing them. As the sun started to set, they found themselves on an empty beach. The sky was painting itself in shades of orange and pink and purple, the kind of sunset that made you believe in magic. They sat on the sand, close enough that their shoulders touched, and watched the waves roll in. I don't want to go, she said suddenly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the ocean. His heart jumped. What? To Barcelona? I don't want to go. She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the sunset. I was planning to turn it down. Before I even met you, actually. I was going to email them and say no. Why? Because I'm tired of running. My whole life, I've been chasing the next thing, the next opportunity, the next achievement. I left law school and threw myself into art. I've moved cities 3 times in 5 years. I'm always running toward something or away from something, but I never just stay. He didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to tell her to stay, to choose him, to give whatever this was between them a real chance. But another part, the scared part, held him back. But it's an incredible opportunity, he said, echoing his own words from weeks ago. It could change your career. I know, she said softly. And that's what makes this so hard. Because for the first time, I want to stay somewhere. Want to see what happens if I stop running. She looked at him directly. Want to see what happens with you. His throat felt tight. I'm terrified, he admitted. Of getting hurt again. Of not being enough. Of feeling something real? She finished for him. Yeah, me too. They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky darker, filling it with the first stars. He thought about his sister's words, about the choice between safety and possibility, about what it meant to really live instead of just exist. I want you to stay, he finally said, the words feeling like they were being pulled from somewhere deep inside him. But I'm scared to ask you to. What if you resent me for it later? What if you stay and then realize I'm not worth giving up Barcelona for? What if I go and spend 6 months wishing I'd stayed? She countered. What if we never find out what we could have been because we were both too scared to try? So what do we do? She was quiet for a long moment. I think I need to go. The words hit him like cold water. What? Not forever. Not as an ending. But I need to go and do this thing. Prove to myself that I can. I've spent so long running away from things that I need to know I can run toward something and then choose to come back. She took his hand, her fingers warm against his. I want to come back to you, but I need to go first, do you understand? He did, even though it hurt. She needed to know that staying was a choice, not just another form of running. And maybe he needed the time too to figure out if he was really ready to let someone in again. How long? He asked. The residency is 6 months, but I could come back for visits and you could come see me if you wanted. If you think you could handle the distance. 6 months. It felt like forever and no time at all. 6 months of wondering, waiting, hoping that what they had was strong enough to survive the separation. I don't know if I can do this, he said honestly. I don't know if I can either, she admitted. But maybe that's the point. Maybe love is supposed to be scary. Maybe the things worth having are the things that terrify us. They stayed on that beach until the cold drove them back to their hotel. That night, they talked for hours about what it might look like. Video calls and text messages and visits when they could afford them. About trust and patience and faith that what they were building was worth the wait. It wasn't a perfect solution. There were no guarantees. But as he lay awake later, listening to her breathe softly beside him, he realized that maybe that was okay. Maybe the uncertainty was part of it. Maybe real love meant choosing each other even when it was hard, even when the outcome wasn't guaranteed. The next morning, they drove back to the city in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not heavy with unspoken words, but full of understanding. They'd made a choice together to try something that scared them both. When he dropped her off at her apartment, she kissed him gently. 1 week, she said. I leave in 1 week. Let's make it count. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Over the next 7 days, they spent every possible moment together. He helped her pack, took more photos of her, memorized the way she laughed and the expression she made when she was thinking. She gave him a painting, one she'd been working on privately. It showed 2 figures standing on opposite shores but connected by a bridge of light and color. So we don't forget, she said simply. The night before her flight, they didn't sleep. They talked about everything and nothing, made promises to try, to trust, to not let fear win. When morning came too soon, he drove her to the airport, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. At the departure gate, she hugged him hard. I'm coming back, she whispered. I promise. This isn't goodbye. It's not goodbye, he agreed, even though it felt like it. He watched her walk through security, watched her turn back one last time to wave, watched he. The first week without her was the hardest. He'd wake up and reach for his phone, hoping for a message, then remember the time difference. When her text finally came, they felt both comforting and painful. Little glimpses into a life that was happening thousands of miles away, a life he wasn't part of. Barcelona is beautiful, she wrote one morning, but it doesn't feel like home yet. Maybe it never will. He stared at those words for a long time before responding. Give it time. You just got there. His sister noticed the change in him immediately. He was going through the motions of life but not really living it. Working, eating, sleeping, repeat. Waiting for messages that sometimes came and sometimes didn't because she was busy or he was asleep or life just got in the way. You look miserable, his sister said bluntly, one evening when she stopped by with dinner. This is exactly what I was afraid of. I'm fine, he lied. You're not fine. You're doing that thing again where you shut down and just exist instead of live. She set down her fork and looked at him seriously. You need to do something. You can't just wait around for 6 months like your life is on pause. What am I supposed to do? I don't know. Work on your photography. Actually pursue it this time. Not just as a hobby, but as something real. Give yourself something to focus on besides missing her. He wanted to argue, but deep down he knew she was right. He'd been so focused on what he'd lost that he'd forgotten to live his own life. That wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to himself either. So he started taking pictures again. Real pictures, not just boring buildings for clients. He walked through the city with his camera, capturing moments that moved him. An old man feeding pigeons in the park, A child's abandoned toy on a bench. The way light filtered through autumn leaves. Small moments of beauty that he'd stopped noticing somewhere along the way. It felt good. Scary, but good. Like waking up a part of himself that had been sleeping for too long. He sent some of the photos to her. "Getting back into it," he wrote. "Feels weird, but right." Her response came hours later. "These are incredible. This is the you I met that night at the gallery, the one who sees the world differently. I'm so proud of you." Those words meant more than she probably knew. She wasn't just waiting for him either. She was living her life, creating her art, becoming the person she was meant to be. And somehow that made him love her more, not less. But it wasn't all easy. There were hard days. Days when the video calls felt more frustrating than comforting, because they could see each other but not touch. Days when he'd see couples walking hand in hand and feel an ache so sharp it took his breath away. Days when he wondered if they were both just fooling themselves, if long distance was just a slow way of breaking up. One particularly rough night, about 6 weeks after she'd left, he almost called it off. The loneliness felt overwhelming, suffocating. He typed out a message saying maybe they should just be realistic. Maybe this was too hard, maybe they should end things cleanly before it got worse. But before he could send it, his phone rang. It was her, calling at some odd hour in Barcelona, her face filling his screen. "I couldn't sleep," she said, and he could see she'd been crying. "I just needed to see you." "Is that okay?" "Of course it's okay," he said, his own eyes stinging. "I was just thinking about you. I miss you so much it hurts," she admitted. "Some days I wonder if I made a mistake coming here. If I should have just stayed. Are you happy there?" he asked. "With your art, with what you're creating?" She paused, thinking about it. "Yeah, actually, I am. The work I'm doing here is some of the best I've ever done. But that doesn't make missing you any easier." "I know," he said quietly. "I miss you too. Every single day." They talked until she finally fell asleep, her phone propped up on her pillow so he could still see her face. He watched her sleep for a few minutes, this woman who'd chosen to come back to him, even though she was thousands of miles away right now. And he realized something important. This distance, as hard as it was teaching them something. It was teaching them that love wasn't just about being together when it was easy. It was about choosing each other even when it was hard. Even when every logical part of your brain said it would be simpler to just let go. He deleted the message he'd almost sent and wrote a different one instead. "Thank you for calling tonight. I needed that more than you know. 3 more months. We can do this." After that night, something shifted. He stopped seeing the distance as something to endure and started seeing it as part of their story. Every day apart was making him more sure of what he wanted, and what he wanted was her. He threw himself into his photography with new energy. He started putting together a portfolio, reaching out to galleries, taking risks he'd been too afraid to take before. One small gallery agreed to look at his work, and to his shock, they offered him a spot in a group exhibition. When he told her, she screamed so loud through the video call that he had to pull the phone away from his ear. "I told you," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I told you that you were talented. When is it? Please tell me I can be there." He checked the dates. "It's in 2 months. You'll still be in Barcelona." Her face fell. "Maybe I could come back early just for a few days." "No," he interrupted. "You need to finish your residency. This is important for you. I'll take lots of pictures and we can celebrate when you get back." "When I get back," she repeated like a promise. "That's only 3 months away now. 3 months and I'm coming home to you." The exhibition was both terrifying and thrilling, standing in a gallery with his work on the walls, watching strangers look at his photographs, hearing them discuss the emotion and depth in the images. His sister came, proud and emotional. Some of his old friends from his photography days showed up, surprised and impressed that he was finally pursuing his passion. But the person he most wanted there was thousands of miles away, watching the whole thing through a video call that he'd set up with his sister's help. She cried when she saw his work displayed professionally, told him over and over how proud she was, how this was just the beginning. One of the gallery owners approached him during the evening. "These are remarkable," she said, gesturing to his photos. "Especially this series. There's such intimacy in them, such vulnerability. Would you be interested in a solo show?" His heart nearly stopped. "A solo show? We'd need about 3 months to set it up properly. But yes, I think your work deserves its own exhibition." 3 months. The same amount of time until she came home. He said yes without hesitation. For the first time in years, he was saying yes to something that scared him. Yes to opportunity, yes to believing in himself. That night, after the gallery closed and everyone had gone home, he sat in his apartment and video called her. She was in her studio in Barcelona, paint on her hands, exhausted but happy. "I have news," he said. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news. They want to give me a solo exhibition. In 3 months." She screamed again, and this time he was ready for it. "That's incredible." "That's perfect timing." "I know," he said, smiling. "It feels like everything is finally coming together." "It is coming together," she said softly. "We're coming together. All of this, the distance, the growing, the struggling, it's all leading somewhere good." "I can feel it, me too," he admitted. "I'm not scared anymore. Or maybe I am, but I'm okay with being scared because I know what I want now." "What do you want?" "You," he said simply. "I want you. I want this. I want us to figure out what comes next. Together." She smiled, that beautiful smile that had first caught his attention in the gallery all those months ago. "Good, because I want that too. More than anything." The last 2 months crawled by and flew past at the same time. He worked on his solo exhibition, carefully selecting and editing photos, writing descriptions, making decisions about framing and placement. She finished her residency with a final showcase that he watched through a live stream, bursting with pride at seeing her work displayed so beautifully. They counted down the days together. 2 months became 6 weeks, became 1 month, became 2 weeks. Every video call felt charged with anticipation, with the knowledge that soon they wouldn't need screens between them anymore. He picked up his phone one afternoon to find a message from her. Just a photo of a plane ticket and 3 words. "Coming home tomorrow." Tomorrow. She was coming home tomorrow, a whole week earlier than planned. His hands shook as he typed back. "Tomorrow? Couldn't wait any longer. Finished everything I needed to finish. Now I just need to see you." He spent that entire night cleaning his apartment, planning what he'd say, trying on different shirts like a teenager before a first date. He barely slept, too excited and nervous and hopeful to rest. The next afternoon, he stood at the airport arrivals gate, his heart pounding so hard, he thought everyone around him must be able to hear it. Every person who came through those doors made him jump, thinking it might be her, and then it was. She walked through the doors looking tired from the flight but more beautiful than he remembered. Their eyes met across the crowded airport, and for a moment they just stood there, drinking in the sight of each other in real life, not through a screen. Then they were moving, meeting in the middle, and he was holding her for the first time in 4 months. She smelled like paint and airports and something uniquely her, and she fit against him perfectly, like coming. The first few days after her return felt almost unreal, like he might wake up and find out it had all been a dream. They spent hours just being together, making up for lost time, walking through the city holding hands, sitting in cafes talking about everything and nothing, falling asleep on his couch while watching movies neither of them paid attention to. But reality had a way of creeping back in. She still had to find a new place to live since she'd given up her old studio apartment before Barcelona. He had his solo exhibition to prepare for, which was consuming more time than he'd expected. They had to figure out what this relationship actually looked like now that they were in the same city again, now that the distance wasn't an excuse anymore. One evening, about a week after her return, they were in his apartment. She was sketching in her notebook while he edited photos on his laptop. It was comfortable, domestic even, but something felt off. He could sense tension in the air, like they were both waiting for the other to say something important. "We need to talk," she said finally, setting down her pencil. His stomach dropped. Those 4 words never led anywhere good. "Okay," she turned to face him fully. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next. For us, I mean. We spent 4 months apart, growing and changing and becoming better versions of ourselves. But we did it separately. I know," he said carefully, not sure where this was going. "And now we're together again, and it's wonderful, but I'm scared." She looked down at her hands. "I'm scared that we'll fall into some routine and lose what made us special. I'm scared that I'll wake up one day and realize I've made my whole life about you and forgotten about myself. Or that you'll do the same." He understood what she was saying, even though it hurt a little to hear it. "So what do you want to do?" "I want us to be intentional about this. About us." She looked up at him, her eyes serious. "I don't want to just drift into a relationship because it's easy, or because we missed each other. I want us to actively choose each other every day while still being whole people on our own. I can do that, he said, and he meant it. Actually, I think I need that too. I spent 2 years after my ex broke up with me being lost because I'd made her my whole world. I don't want to do that again, not even with you. She smiled, relieved. So we agree. We build a life together, but we keep our own lives too. You pursue your photography seriously. I find a new studio and keep creating. We support each other, but we don't lose ourselves. Deal, he said, reaching for her hand. They spent the next few weeks figuring out what that looked like in practice. She found a studio space in the same warehouse district where her old one had been, this one with better light and more room. He dedicated specific hours each day to his exhibition work, treating it like the professional commitment it was rather than just a hobby. But they also made time for each other. Tuesday nights became their night no matter what. Sometimes they'd go out. Sometimes they'd cook dinner together. Sometimes they'd just sit and talk. The point wasn't what they did, but that they showed up for each other consistently. His sister met her properly for the first time at a family dinner, and he watched nervously as the two most important women in his life sized each other up. "So you're the one who's been making my brother smile again," his sister said, not quite joking. "I'd like to think he's been making himself smile," she replied smoothly. "I just reminded him he could." His sister grinned. "Okay, I like you." The weeks turned into months. Her art started selling consistently, enough that she could pay her bills without a side job. His exhibition date got closer, and with it came increasing nervousness. What if people didn't like his work? What if he'd made a mistake thinking he could do this professionally? She found him one night in his apartment surrounded by photos, second-guessing every choice he'd made. "Hey," she said gently, sitting beside him on the floor. "What's going on in that head of yours?" "I don't know if I'm good enough," he admitted. "What if this whole thing is a disaster? What if I've been fooling myself? Do you remember what you told me once? That my art mattered because it was real, because it came from truth?" She picked up one of his photos, an image of an elderly woman laughing on a park bench. "This is real. This is truth. You're not fooling anyone. You're finally showing people who you really are." "That's what scares me," he said quietly. "I know, but you're going to do it anyway, because you're brave even when you don't feel like it." She kissed his forehead. "And I'll be right there with you." The night of his exhibition opening arrived too quickly. He stood in the gallery watching people file in, his palms sweating despite the cool air. The walls were covered with his work, photos that felt like pieces of his soul on display. His series about urban connection, images that showed loneliness and hope in the small moments that made life beautiful. She arrived early, wearing a simple dress that made his heart skip. She walked slowly around the gallery, looking at each photo with the same intensity she'd given to his first shots of her in her studio. When she came back to him, she had tears in her eyes. "These are incredible. You've captured something so essentially human. I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "Yes, you could have," she corrected gently. "You just needed to believe in yourself enough to try. I just helped you remember that was possible." The gallery filled with people, strangers who stopped in front of his photos and really looked at them. A few sales tags went up, red dots marking pieces that someone wanted to take home. Critics from local art blogs asked him questions about his process, his inspiration, but the best moment came when a young photographer, maybe 22 or 23, approached him nervously. "I just wanted to say thank you," the young man said. "I've been too scared to show anyone my work, but seeing this tonight, seeing that someone took the risk and it paid off, it makes me think maybe I could too." He looked at this kid, seeing himself from years ago, and felt something click into place. This was why art mattered. Not for the money or recognition, but for the connection, for making someone else feel less alone, for inspiring them to be brave. "You should absolutely show your work," he told the young photographer. "Don't wait as long as I did. The world needs to see what you create." After the gallery closed that night, exhausted and happy, they walked through the city streets. The autumn had turned to winter, and their breath made clouds in the cold air. "You did it," she said, squeezing his hand. "You really did it." "We did it," he corrected. "Both of us. You went to Barcelona and came back. I started taking real risks with my photography. We survived the distance and came out stronger. So what's next?" she asked. He stopped walking, turning to face her under a streetlight. The city moved around them. but it felt like they were in their own bubble, separate from everything else. "I don't know exactly," he said honestly, "but I know I want to figure it out with you. No more playing it safe. No more hiding from life because I'm scared of getting hurt. You taught me that living means taking risks, means being vulnerable, means choosing courage over comfort." She stepped closer, and he was reminded of that first night in the gallery when she'd teased him about forgetting how to breathe, except now he knew that being with her didn't make him forget to breathe. It made him remember how. "Do you know what I realized in Barcelona?" she said softly. "I realized that independence doesn't mean being alone. It means being strong enough to choose connection from a place of wholeness, not need. I don't need you to complete me. I'm already complete, but I want you in my life because you make everything better." "That's exactly how I feel," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Good," she said, smiling. "Because I'm not going anywhere. Not to Barcelona, not to anywhere else. I'm staying right here, building a life that's mine and choosing to share it with you." They kissed under that streetlight, and it felt like every moment had been leading to this. Not the kiss itself, but the understanding behind it. They were two whole people who'd learned to breathe on their own, now choosing to share that breath with each other. Over the next few months, life continued to unfold. His exhibition led to more opportunities, commissions from magazines, requests for specific projects. Her art continued to grow in popularity, galleries from other cities reaching out to show her work. They celebrated each other's successes and supported each other through the inevitable setbacks. They had fights sometimes, real ones about real things, about whose turn it was to compromise, about making time for each other when work got busy, about all the normal stuff that comes with building a life with someone. But they fought fair and always came back to the same question: do we still choose each other? And the answer was always yes. One evening, almost a year after that first night at the gallery, they were back in her studio. She was painting, and he was photographing her just like old times. The light was perfect, golden hour streaming through the windows, catching the paint on her hands and the concentration on her face. She paused, looking over at him with that smile he'd fallen in love with. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "That night at the gallery when I said that thing about forgetting how to breathe, I was trying to be clever. Trying to seem confident and mysterious," she laughed. "But the truth is you made me forget H.